On April 15, 1912, at 2:20 in the morning, the RMS Titanic disappeared beneath the surface of the North Atlantic Ocean. In less than 3 hours, the largest moving object ever built by human hands had become a tomb for over 1,500 people. The world was stunned. How could this happen? The ship was brand new, state-of-the-art, designed by the best engineers of the age. It was marketed as practically unsinkable. Passengers had believed it. The crew had believed it. But the ship was never unsinkable. It was a marvel of human ambition built on a foundation of arrogance, cost-cutting, and a fatal belief that nature could be conquered by steel and confidence. What follows is not just about a ship that sank. It's about every decision, every compromise, every ignored warning that turned a tragedy into an inevitability. It's about who lived, who died, and why those outcomes were determined long before the iceberg ever appeared. It begins in Belfast, Ireland, where Harland and Wolff Shipyard built the vessel for the White Star Line, a British shipping company locked in fierce competition with its rival, Cunard Line. Cunard had just launched 2 record-breaking ships, the Lusitania and Mauretania, the fastest passenger liners in the world. White Star Line couldn't compete on speed, so they chose a different strategy: luxury and size. They would build the largest, most opulent ships ever conceived. The plan was to build 3 sister ships, Olympic, Titanic, and Britannic. Together they would dominate the transatlantic passenger trade. Construction on the Titanic began on March 31, 1909. It took over 2 years and the labor of thousands of workers. At least 2 workers died during construction, though the actual number may have been higher. The finished ship was staggering. 882 feet long, 92 feet wide, with a gross tonnage of 46,328 tons. It had 9 decks and 4 large funnels, though only 3 were functional. The 4th was decorative. The ship could carry over 2,400 passengers plus approximately 900 crew members, for a total capacity of around 3,300 people. First-class accommodations were extraordinarily luxurious. There was a grand staircase carved from oak and wrought iron, topped with a glass dome. There was a swimming pool, the first on any ocean liner. A squash court. A Turkish bath. A gymnasium. The finest suites had private promenades and working fireplaces. The ship's designer, Thomas Andrews, managing director at Harland and Wolff, had poured himself into every detail. He was proud of his creation. But he also knew its vulnerabilities. The Titanic had 16 watertight compartments in its hull, separated by bulkhead doors that could be closed from the bridge. The design allowed the ship to survive flooding in up to 4 compartments and still remain afloat. This contributed to the belief that the ship was virtually unsinkable. But there were critical limitations. The watertight bulkheads only extended up to E deck or F deck. They did not go all the way to the top of the hull. If water filled one compartment above a certain level, it would spill over into the next compartment, and then the next, like water overflowing ice cube trays. Once the bow tilted downward, the compartments would become useless. The ship also didn't carry enough lifeboats. British Board of Trade regulations required ships over 10,000 tons to carry 16 lifeboats. The regulations hadn't been updated since 1894 when ships were much smaller. The vessel exceeded this requirement by installing 20 lifeboats with a total capacity of 1,178 people. But it could carry 3,547 people at full capacity. More than 2,000 people would have no way off in an emergency. Alexander Carlisle, one of the designers, had proposed up to 48 lifeboats. White Star Line decided against the additional boats. Too many lifeboats would clutter the first-class promenade decks and make the ship appear unsafe, contradicting the marketing message. On April 10, 1912, the Titanic departed Southampton, England, on its maiden voyage to New York City. There were 2,224 people aboard. The passengers represented every level of society. In first class were some of the wealthiest people in the world, John Jacob Astor IV, one of the richest men in America. Benjamin Guggenheim. Isidore and Ida Strauss, co-owners of Macy's. Margaret Molly Brown. In second class were middle-class professionals, teachers, and tourists. In third class were immigrants. Hundreds of people fleeing poverty in Europe, hoping to start new lives in America. They were Irish, Italian, Swedish, Lebanese, Syrian, Chinese, and many other nationalities. Many had saved every penny for their tickets. The ship made stops in Cherbourg, France, and Queenstown, Ireland. Then it headed west across the Atlantic. For 4 days, the voyage was nearly flawless. The weather was excellent. The sea was calm. Passengers enjoyed elaborate meals, toured the facilities, and marveled at the ship. The crew was confident. Captain Edward John Smith, 62 years old, was one of the most experienced mariners in the world. This was planned to be his final voyage before retirement. But as the ship steamed westward, warnings began arriving. On April 14, the wireless operators received at least 6 ice warnings from other ships. The warnings described a massive ice field directly in the ship's path, filled with icebergs. Captain Smith was aware of ice in the area. He made a slight course adjustment, steering south of the normal route. But critically, he did not reduce speed. The ship continued at approximately 22 knots, nearly full speed. This was standard practice. Captains maintained speed despite ice warnings, believing that with good visibility and alert lookouts, they could spot icebergs in time to maneuver around them. But that night, conditions were uniquely dangerous. The sea was extraordinarily calm, flat like glass with no waves. Normally, waves crash against icebergs, creating white foam that makes them visible. In dead calm water, icebergs appear as dark masses, extremely difficult to see. The night was moonless and very clear. There was no moon to illuminate the ice. And the lookouts in the crow's nest did not have binoculars. The binoculars assigned to the crow's nest were locked in a storage locker. Second Officer David Blair had been reassigned just before departure and inadvertently took the key with him. At 11:40 p.m., Lookout Frederick Fleet spotted something directly ahead. A dark mass. An iceberg, directly in their path. He immediately rang the warning bell 3 times and telephoned the bridge. Iceberg, right ahead. First Officer William Murdoch ordered the ship to turn hard to port and put the engines in full reverse. The bow began to swing. For a few seconds, it seemed the maneuver might work. But the vessel was enormous, traveling at high speed, too close to avoid it completely. The starboard side scraped along the iceberg below the waterline. The impact was surprisingly gentle, lasting only about 10 seconds. Most passengers barely noticed. There was a slight shudder, a faint grinding sound. Chunks of ice fell onto the deck. Some people picked up pieces as souvenirs. Below the waterline, the damage was catastrophic. The iceberg had buckled the hull plates and popped rivets, creating openings in 6 of the forward watertight compartments. Water flooded in at an estimated 7 tons per second. Thomas Andrews was summoned to assess the damage. He inspected the flooded areas and examined the damage against his knowledge of the ship's construction. His conclusion was devastating. The ship was going to sink. 6 compartments were compromised. It could only survive flooding in 4. As the bow filled and sank lower, water would spill over the bulkheads into the next compartment, dragging it down. Andrews calculated they had perhaps an hour to an hour and a half. Captain Smith asked if there was any chance at all of saving the ship. Andrews said no. It was doomed. It was approximately 12:05 a.m., just 25 minutes after the collision. Captain Smith ordered the lifeboats prepared and told the wireless operators to send distress calls. The message went out, CQD. SOS. We have struck an iceberg. We are sinking. Require immediate assistance. The closest ship that responded was the RMS Carpathia, about 58 miles away. Captain Arthur Rostron pushed his engines beyond capacity, but even at full speed, it would take nearly 4 hours to arrive. There was another ship much closer. The SS Californian was stopped in the ice, perhaps 10 to 20 miles away. But the Californian's wireless operator had turned off his equipment and gone to bed at 11:30 p.m., just before the collision. He never received the distress calls. Officers on the Californian saw a large ship and saw signal rockets being fired. But Captain Stanley Lord did not order the wireless operator awakened. They took no action. On the Titanic, the crew began loading the lifeboats. The operation was chaotic and tragically inefficient. There had been no proper lifeboat drill. Most passengers had no idea where to go. Many crew members were uncertain about procedures. The order was given, women and children first. But officers interpreted this differently. On the port side, Second Officer Charles Lightoller enforced, women and children only. He refused to allow men into boats, even when seats were empty. He would rather lower a boat half empty than allow men aboard. On the starboard side, First Officer Murdoch interpreted it as, women and children first, but men may board if seats are available. The first lifeboat was lowered at 12:45 a.m. with only 28 people aboard. Its capacity was 65. Many passengers were reluctant to leave. The ship still felt stable. The lights were on. Music was playing. Climbing into a small boat seemed more dangerous than staying on the massive vessel. In third class, the situation was far worse. Third-class accommodations were deep in the ship, far from the boat deck. The layout was confusing. Most passengers didn't speak English. Some gates separating third class from upper decks were locked due to immigration regulations. When the order came to abandon ship, there was no coordinated effort to guide third-class passengers to lifeboats. By the time many third-class passengers fought their way up through the ship, most lifeboats were gone. As time passed, the bow sank lower. The tilt of the deck became steeper. Furniture slid. Glass shattered. The stern lifted upward. At approximately 2:05 a.m., the last lifeboat was lowered. Over 1,500 people were still aboard. The ship's band, led by Wallace Hartley, had been playing throughout the evacuation. As the water rose and the deck tilted, they continued playing. All 8 musicians perished. Thomas Andrews was last seen in the first-class smoking room, staring at a painting. His lifebelt lay discarded. He made no effort to save himself. He went down with the ship he designed. Captain Smith's final moments are uncertain. He was seen on the bridge as water engulfed it. His body was never recovered. By 2:17 a.m., the ship was breaking apart. The bow section separated from the stern and sank. The stern settled briefly, then tilted almost vertically and slipped beneath the surface. At 2:20 a.m., it was gone. More than 1,500 people were in the water. The ocean temperature was 28 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, death typically occurs within 15 to 30 minutes. The sound was described as the most horrific thing survivors ever heard. Hundreds of people screaming for help. Only one lifeboat went back. Lifeboat 14, commanded by 5th Officer Harold Lowe, pulled 4 people from the water. One died shortly after. The other lifeboats did not return. By the time the screaming stopped, nearly everyone in the water was dead. At 4 a.m., the Carpathia arrived and began rescuing survivors. They saved 710 people. 1,514 people died. The statistics reveal devastating inequality. Of first-class passengers, 62% survived. Of second class, 43% survived. Of third class, only 25% survived. Of women in first class, 97% survived. Of women in third class, only 46% survived. Of children in first and second class, all but one survived. Of children in third class, 34 out of 79 died. The wealthy survived because they were closer to lifeboats, because they understood English, because the structure gave them every advantage. The poor died because they were trapped below, because they couldn't navigate the ship, because no one came for them, because their lives were valued less. Investigations revealed systemic failures. The ship didn't have enough lifeboats. Regulations were outdated. It had traveled too fast through known ice. Lookouts didn't have binoculars. Watertight compartments weren't tall enough. The crew was unprepared. The Californian failed to respond. Regulations changed. Ships were required to carry enough lifeboats for everyone. Lifeboat drills became mandatory. Wireless equipment had to be manned 24 hours. The International Ice Patrol was established. These changes saved thousands of lives. But they came too late for the 1,514 people who died. The disaster became a symbol of human ambition and failure, of technological hubris, of the cost of valuing profit over safety, image over substance, confidence over caution. The ship was marketed as practically unsinkable. But it sank on its maiden voyage, in calm seas, on a clear night, killing over 1,500 people, because the people who built it and sailed it believed their own mythology. They forgot that the ocean doesn't care about marketing. That ice doesn't respect reputation. That nature is indifferent to human confidence. The wreck was discovered in 1985, lying 12,500 feet below the surface, broken in two, slowly disintegrating. Eventually, nothing will remain. But the lessons endure. Tragedy is rarely sudden or unforeseeable. It is the accumulation of small compromises, ignored warnings, and the arrogant belief that disaster only happens to other people. The Titanic should never have sunk. It sank because people made choices, bad choices, over and over again, prioritizing the wrong things. And 1,514 people paid the price for other people's mistakes. We remember them. We must remember them. Because their deaths were not inevitable. They were preventable consequences of human decisions. And that makes all the difference. This has been Broadcast History. If you would like to tune into more content like this, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.